Welcome everyone to my video. I will be talking a little bit about man-in-the-middle attacks. I'll be talking about a little bit of what they are, how they work, what types of them exist, what sorts of bad actors use these attacks, and what they can get out of these attacks. And this video is also only based for educational purposes only. There will be some knowledge and a demonstration given about these attacks, so they can be used in real life scenarios, but they are not recommended and should not be done. This recording is also on behalf of my individual video presentation project in my course CYBR 442-50, which is cyber operations, which is also being taught at Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, Minnesota by Professor Alex Hepp. And this video will go over a slideshow and a demonstration about man-in-the-middle attacks. So we will get a little bit of knowledge, just basic knowledge about man-in-the-middle attacks. Like I said, what they are, what they do, who does them, how do they work. And we'll also do a little demonstration just to get some hands-on and dive in to how these attacks might actually work in real life. One way to just think about man-in-the-middle attacks is imagine three people sitting on a bench, and the people on the sides, the two people on the sides, are friends who are trying to talk to each other, but the person in the middle was actually told to sit in the middle to intercept what they're talking about, to hear what they might be talking about, flirting about, or just sharing any sorts of details about a situation. And that person in the middle basically injects themselves so they could be in the middle of the communication and being able to intercept and declassify what they're talking about as if they are actually talking to him while he's just in the middle and he is processing all the information as they're talking. The goal of an attacker in a man-in-the-middle attack is, like I said, just to insert themselves between two targets in order to collect whatever's coming through, or maybe even change what's being transferred as well. Once the attacker is inserted between the two individuals who he is targeting, the attacker can then decrypt the traffic if it's encrypted and obtain information and communication and other details about what's happening between the communication, what could he possibly steal information, what information could he modify for his own good. And basically, these attackers, they're just trying to hijack your session, hijack your real-time communication, and intercept information and modify information just because they are in the middle and they can do whatever they want with what's going through. The two main phases of a man-in-the-middle attack is interception and decryption, if the information is encrypted, because there's also weak protocols that can just be completely sniffed, just like I'll show you in the demonstration. If weak protocols are used, we can literally just eavesdrop and sniff data and information about login attempts that might be unencrypted and weak. There's different methods that attackers can use in the interception phase. One of the easier ways is just by packet sniffing. So if there's any weak protocols in use, the attacker can just sniff what's going on the network, what's happening in the packets, what sort of packets are there. And an attacker can just sniff the information within those packets using a program such as Wireshark, which will be the demo later given in this presentation. But the attacker can also use different methods like IP spoofing, ARP spoofing, and DNS spoofing, which is basically the attacker just manipulating users' trust and manipulating different services and protocols that might need authentication. And the attacker basically spoofs their way in, pretending to be who they're not, in order to squeeze their way into between these two targets who are having this thought to be secure communication. In IP spoofing, an attacker really just acts like an application by altering packet headers within IP addresses, and it basically just allows the targets allows the target users to be sent to the attacker's website when they're trying to access a real URL, which causes the attacker to receive all the communication between what the target actually thinks is legit communication with an application. And in ARP spoofing and DNS spoofing, it's really similar, where the attackers are just manipulating the trust and manipulating ARP messages and DNS records in order to make it look like they are a legitimate item that are supposed to be there, but they're really not, and they're just trying to insert themselves between the two targets that the communication is being intercepted by the attacker. And now, since the attacker is in the middle positioning after he's inserted himself or intercepted the communication, the attacker is now using different tools and different methods to steal the data, steal the information, and be able to decrypt or look and collect and harvest what he can from the communication between these two targets. And he might also be modifying the communication that's going depending on what are the goals of the attacker. And one way that the attacker can just collect information in this middle positioning is eavesdropping, like I said, using Wireshark. And there's also HTTPS spoofing, where the users think that the HTTPS website is actually secure and it's legitimate when it is actually not, and it is just the attacker trying to manipulate the trust again of the users, of the targets. SSL hijacking, SSL stripping, they're very similar in the sense that they are just trying to use these authentication keys and security and TLS authentication methods. They're trying to manipulate those authentication methods in order to change the connection from an encrypted one to a decrypted one. So in SSL hijacking, the attacker gives forged authentication keys to the two parties in the TCP handshake, and in SSL stripping, the attacker basically just downgrades from HTTPS to HTTP, which is completely unsecure now. And these two methods just allow the attacker to go from viewing the encrypted information between these two targets to going and looking at unencrypted information that the target was tricked into giving, because now that their sessions might not be secure due to SSL stripping or SSL hijacking or even HTTPS spoofing. The general understanding of man-in-the-middle attacks is really basic. It is just the attacker trying to insert themselves between two targets, which the communication is being targeted, and the attacker convinces the targets that they might be a legit user or the legit other target that the communication is going on between. And the target trusts the attacker and the methods that the attacker uses and continues their communication as if it is secure, because they don't know that it's unsecure. And during the time that the attacker is now in between these two targets and listening, they can do all sorts of things with information. They can steal information, they can modify the communication, and just overall control the session between these two users. So what do attackers do during a successful attack, such as a man-in-the-middle attack? When they passively listen to this conversation between these two targets, they can steal login credentials, they can alter the content of communication, which just depends on what the attacker is trying to achieve. Different attacks will target different parts of the communication. And the attackers can also steal account information, credit card numbers, private information that shouldn't be talked about, basically. And they can also learn about the network and the protocols that are being used, which leads me to my next slide, which basically talks about what they can do with this information now. These attackers can sell that stolen data that they found, and they can also execute other attacks based on the information that they collected for themselves. because they could have just been using this man-in-the-middle attack to collect information and gather reconnaissance about their target so that they can do a more effective and execute a more effective attack later on, which might be their actual end goal and not this man-in-the-middle attack, which might be just a step for the attacker. And the effectiveness of a successful man-in-the-middle attack allows the attacker to do so much with the targets. The attacker intercepted all of your communication. He can modify it, and he can sell your information, and most of the time you won't even know that it is occurring, which is the scariest part. And to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks for personal considerations and professional considerations, you always just want to try to use your common sense, especially avoid weak Wi-Fi connections, especially if they're without passwords, if there's no proper encryption that you can see. Also, make sure that the websites that you're using are secured. You can look, usually on Google at least, on the top left, you can see if it is HTTPS and not HTTP, which is very, very insecure. You should also avoid sketchy websites that just don't feel right, because they probably are not right. And also, don't forget to log out of applications, and especially secure applications and systems. And again, and of course, the number one important method to stay secure and prevent these attacks from happening to you is do not use public networks especially when logging in or accessing sensitive information or transactions or even websites, just because the attackers I know attackers can target cafes and all these public transport places that might provide internet connections for free, and it is the perfect breeding ground for man-in-the-middle attacks and all these sorts of attacks that might be intercepting your information without you even knowing. Our next step in the video will be the demonstration. We will be using Wireshark, which is a packet sniffer, which basically collects live traffic from your network. And you can also export these live traffic scans into PCAP files, which you can look back later on and just do some investigation of what's going on the network, what protocols are being used, and if there's any anomalies that you can see. Wireshark can be used to many effects, and a lot of professionals use Wireshark, and it is very widespread just because of the information that it can provide for security professionals. And these are some of the references that I've used for this presentation, and I am very grateful for their knowledge. Now let's move on to the demonstration. Hello everyone, welcome to the demonstration. Here we will be using this program Wireshark right here, which is a packet sniffer, where we can basically see what's going on the network. We can sniff packets and even export our sniffs for later. And we will be using a HTTP login website in order to prove that we can harvest the credentials from this HTTP login website and view them in a Wireshark. So let's begin by starting our sniff here. And once we have started our scan, we will now go into a vulnerable HTTP website, and we will enter a name such as David Boss. We're going to press login, and it will send those credentials to this website. And now we will type in HTTP here in the filter box to see what sorts of HTTP data we can find. And now we can use this program Wireshark to look at any sorts of protocols that we want. In this case, we are looking for my login attempt on the HTTP website. So now we will be looking through what we can find here and trying to find where we can see our login, David Boss. As you can see, we are getting closer. Here we can see you must log in. we are looking within the hypertext transfer protocol, which is exactly what we need. Right here, we can see username and password, David Boss. Okay. And if we open this HTTP form URL encoded, we can see there's two items that Wireshark collected, which is the username and the password, which is David Boss. And just like that, if an attacker has got you with one of his attacks and he has stripped your security, so you went from HTTPS to HTTP, and he tricked you, let's say, with a website that looks identical to the one that you're supposed to log in, and so you think it's secure and you log in with your credentials into his HTTP website. Now the attacker can do exactly what I did and collect your credentials. As you see, it's scary easy, especially thinking that, like, what if an attacker got me to open an HTTP website. It's a scary thing and it is very realistic, which is why we talked about those SSL stripping, HTTPS spoofing attacks, because it happens in real life where attackers may try to trick you into falling for their fake, unreliable websites. And yeah, we basically found the username and password just like that. That was very fast and very easy. And using Wireshark, we can see a ton of different protocols that we didn't even cover in this demonstration. This demonstration is just a cool one that you can do at home if your network adapter allows it. You sometimes you need specific network hardware on your computer in order to properly do what we did here. But this tool is very interesting because this is one way that attackers can just sniff and harvest your credentials, especially if you're using vulnerable protocols. And the attacker can also use Wireshark to collect all sorts of information about, like, the TCP handshake, all sorts of other protocols, which are other parts of man-in-the-middle attacks, which attackers use nowadays. And attackers can also collect a ton of data from Wireshark. They can look at different protocols that you've been using, secure or not, and it can give them a lot of insight, and it can provide them with a lot of information about what sort of attacks they could do later on, which is very cool. And I hope you guys learned something from this demonstration and from my presentation. I found it really cool and I wanted to share it. I've done it a couple times and it was just very interesting for me. So I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Please do not repeat this at home. This was only for my presentation, and I am hoping that you enjoyed this video and you learned at least one thing new.